Get started. Yeah, it's recording now. So,
Right.
welcome, Kate. For those of you who have joined in, this is the first of my Bright Mind Blab Chat series, and Kate has been great in agreeing to be on the first episode. So it's kind of exciting.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It is very exciting.
Yeah, it is great. I love it. I'm Jamie Good, the digital fluency coach. So let's get started. We're going to talk about developing your personal brand with storytelling today. And Kate, how about you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Kate. I'm the founder of 9 to 5 Narrative, and I look at how we can bring storytelling into our business lives. So how we tell the story of what we do and why we do it in a way that is compelling to your audience, as well as being really authentic to yourself. So yeah, that's essentially what I help people do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, just let people know, if you want to ask a question on the sidebar, if you put /Q first, it will highlight as a question for us. So, and I got a first question for you. I wonder why you've chosen storytelling as the focus of your life and career.
Storytelling for me has always been something that's been underlining a lot of what I do. I have the worst memory, so I always remember stories. And for me, I just have a general curiosity. I really enjoy people and hearing how their experience is different from my own. So story and storytelling for me has always been a way of really connecting and learning too. I'm a continuous learner, and I think that there's so much that can be learned from somebody else. And sharing what you've gone through and the things you've experienced is the best way to do that. And if you can even do that within, sort of the structure of a story, it's something that is memorable to somebody else, and it's a way of really connecting. So like really authentically connecting. So that's
awesome. Yeah, I agree with that. The authentic connection is very much true in that experience I think I've had with the storytelling night that you hosted, that one night that I went to. You get an intimate look into people's lives that you might not otherwise.
Yeah, that's just it. And storytelling is also, for me, it's a very vulnerable act. Sharing your experiences and what you've gone through in life, it's very personal. And to have the courage to get up, especially on stage, right, when everyone's looking at you with a microphone, to get up on stage and say, this is something that I lived through, and this is an experience that I had. You're allowing people to see who you are, like your authentic self, and that's not a light decision that you take, and there's a lot of courage that comes with that.
So about the vulnerability part, do you find that people are really hesitant just because storytelling involves being more vulnerable than maybe regular day-to-day activity?
Yeah, there's kind of sometimes a fine balance, but for sure I've had those clients where, one-on-one, they've had this incredible life, that they've overcome so many different things, and they have a lot of information and just strength to share with the world. Mm-hmm. And then when you get up on stage and an entirely different story comes out, than the one that we prepared.
That's funny.
Yeah, and it just takes time, right? And it takes a level of vulnerability. There have been times when I've gone to different storytelling events, though, and you can kind of get the opposite, extent of that, where people are just like, too much information, where it's just like it's not relevant to the story at all, and it's just a personal detail that no one really needed to know. So that's, I think, where the art comes in with storytelling. Is like, how do you share, something that is personal to you without necessarily oversharing, and that takes a lot of practice at times too. And I think too, it's very interesting around this idea of shame and what you're ashamed of, right? Because vulnerability is linked to that. Anybody that is familiar with like Brené Brown and her work, what we can be ashamed of is something that is linked to our vulnerability. And do we want to share that and expose ourselves to that? So for me, that's kind of what the power of storytelling is.
Awesome. Now we have a question here from Catherine. She's asking, do you have tips for effective storytelling?
Yeah, for sure. I have tons. I'm going to go with sort of the stage storytelling because that can be the most intimidating, especially because when you get up on stage, especially like a properly lit one, you can't actually see the audience. You can usually sometimes see the front row. So it really takes a lot of sort of courage and blind faith a lot. So the first tip that I would have is always know your first sentence and know your last sentence.
Oh, okay.
So when you because you're going to be nervous. Like still to this day, when I get on stage, I'm nervous. But if you know what your first sentence is, then you can start to relax, and it really just informs the rest of the story. So when you're telling an experiential story too, it's something that's happened to you, so you know it. So it's just a matter of getting started. And knowing what your last sentence is also is like sort of like a goalpost. So when I coach or teach on storytelling, I call stories kind of like the beats of your story. So if you know what the essential components are, once you get started, then it's just a matter of really lining them up and then communicating what happened to you, again, within a story structure to your audience. So that's the first one, I think, that I say is the most important. Yeah, kind of practice for sure. Practice for sure your story. There's been the odd time that I've kind of gone up in sort of a small, intimate environment and not really known what I was going to say has never really been the most successful. And now we all have smartphones, so we all have these apps on our phone. So usually when I'm coaching storytelling, I say, record yourself, tell your story, record it, and see what the time is. And then challenge yourself to say the same story within 5 minutes, and challenge yourself to say the same story within a minute. And what that does is it really targets what the relevant and important information in that story is. Because I find that sometimes within storytelling, especially experiential, you can get your ego involved a little bit because you lived it, right? And you so every detail seems really, really important. Yeah. But sometimes that can get in the way of telling a really great story. Sometimes the details that you think are important actually aren't really. And so when you go through the exercise, it really also highlights to you what information is needed and what is not. And then that kind of is what I call sort of like the story structure. So that is kind of like the posts in the house, right? So that you need in order for the house to stand.
That makes a lot of sense. And I like that how you say kind of distill it down to 1 minute, because it was funny last week, someone was asking me why I like Twitter so much, and I like because it forces people to be so succinct.
Yeah.
To see what you really mean in just 140 characters as opposed to going on and on and on. So you get to the meat of the matter, I think, a lot faster.
Yeah, I think, too, that's probably why it was so successful, right? Because you give people the conch, but you only allow them to have like a certain amount of time to fit into your mind.
Catherine has another question here. So, Catherine, I'm just going to let you join this seat so you can ask your question to Kate directly. So let's just get this seat open. She's asking about the brand part of storytelling, which is it's a good piece to look at too, I think. Do you then with clients, so usually are they asking for help with marketing or more just the brand as a whole? Does it change for you or? Yeah,
it's funny because the whole branding part of storytelling was really something that evolved out of my work with my clients. Myself and I think some other people kind of, when you talk about brand, especially personal branding, it can start to feel very icky because there's a sense of what you're trying to do is be something that you're not. And for me, what the storytelling is about, more specifically, is really figuring out sort of what are the narrative themes going on in your life. So what are the experiences that you've had? And I like to call it more like an inside out. So instead of trying to adapt your life to sort of external or outside value sets, because that's essentially what a brand is, right? Like a brand is a certain amount of value sets that you're trying to emulate or be, looking sort of inside. So when I'm working with clients and I'm building what I call like a story database, really figuring out or getting to the heart of what are the different experiences that have really been transformational for that person. Okay. Because all of our experiences really help develop our character.
Yes.
And then, so what I do is that sort of with certain experiences or certain decisions that people have made in their life, It's like, what does that tell me about that person? And then what are the inherent values to that experience? So instead of saying, you know, this is what I stand for, take me at my word, it can be more of a demonstration. Like, I'm someone who is loyalty is very important to me. And I'm going to tell you a story about when I was in high school with my friend and how that was challenged and how I got through that. So for me, that's kind of where the branding comes in. So when you're talking about business branding, especially with small business and entrepreneurs tend to be somewhat a little bit easier, because as most people who are entrepreneurs out there listening to this, what you do is your passion. And your passion comes obviously from the experiences in your life.
Yes.
So aligning what your company is about often becomes a little bit easier because it's such a personal experience for you and it's a personal endeavor. And so if you are clear on sort of like why you do what you do, and how you've come to do what you do, and then it's easier sort of to trace back what the values are that align to that. So then again, it comes in regards to marketing or content out to either clients or prospective clients. It becomes a little bit easier because you're not saying like, believe me again, you know, or you're not even using like umbrella terms. Umbrella terms also are very irritating. You can be like, you know, why do I do what I do? And this is the story behind it. And people can connect with that more easily than just saying like, we're about loyalty and fast service and trust. And it's like, great. So are most people. How is that specific to you though? And then if you have that story ready, then you can tell that, and it's more authentic, right? Because I think more and more people, I think, are really looking for that, because branding is such a pervasive part of our life now, of our culture, right? With Twitter and with Facebook, you know, I think for me too, it's a topic that I want to write on, which is more of this, you know, being disconnected in our connectivity. You know, I'm not the first person to think of this, right? You know, it's been in the news and you see it. You know, for me, I actually went to a branding conference, and I was sitting in the audience, and afterwards, after the panel session, there was a Q&A, and a woman got up and she took sort of like the first 30 minutes of her time to sort of say to the panel, you know, thank you for being honest and really sharing and being authentic. And for me, there's that, like, I don't know, there's something that really irritated me, and I couldn't figure it out for the longest time. And I was thinking about it, and she was just saying, thank you for being honest. But the fact that would be so important, I think, just really shows that, you know, what is it that we're creating or generating in our lives or our culture that we don't think people are being honest or open. And I think that's why, and I think that's why so many people are really being attracted to storytelling, because it combines that pervasive element and need for entertainment in our life with something that is still authentic and that you can relate to. So that's kind of my soapbox, I guess.
But it makes sense. It makes sense, and it was one of the things I was thinking of asking you is like that storytelling is becoming more and more of a buzzword in marketing, and I think it makes sense to what you're saying is because when you look at sort of how things are going in our connected society, like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn aren't real life, and so we want to make sure that what we see on those platforms is actually authentically connected to what's really going on behind the scenes, quote unquote. So it makes sense that storytelling then would come in, because that's where the experience matches what the words are basically. And like what you were describing sounds like a show, don't tell kind of thing. Like, don't tell me, you know, show me really what's going on. So like as an entrepreneur, like we're both entrepreneurs, and maybe some people on this call or those who are going to watch it after are entrepreneurs, if they're thinking like, I want to include this storytelling in my branding or in my personal branding, how would someone start? How would you begin if you've really never done it before? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because storytelling and branding to a certain degree, that, you know, I've been reading a lot of material in regards to also leadership and storytelling, and this idea of being human. So how do you structure a story that connects with people? Because it's really about showing your humanity, and that's where the vulnerability comes into play. So when you're constructing your story, you know, with every great story, there are key elements. And again, this links back into neurobiology, which is what I talk on as well. I think that it's really important, not only just for other people, but for myself to really understand, okay, what is the science behind this? Because I think that there's a feeling that storytelling is just very abstract. It's like a kumbaya, let's all hold hands, and well, this is really a really nice exercise, but I don't really know how it applies to my life, and I'm just gonna go back to work, right? But there's a neurobiology behind it as to why we connect and relate to storytelling so well. And there's lots of different resources online that you can take a look at. One specifically is a TED Talk. But in the future, storytelling is actually a really great resource as well online, and I have some really great videos. But yeah, it just basically links back to sort of releasing of different hormones and stress hormones that really focus our attention and really kind of trigger that empathy that's in all of us as the social creatures that we are. But the trick then becomes, okay, what are the elements in a story that triggers those responses, right? Because everyone's had that. You know, you're out with someone, you're like, oh my God, it's so boring, stop talking. You know, so it's like, okay, what are the elements in that are needed in a story in order for it to be compelling to somebody? And that's where the practice and the writing down comes into play. But you know, and there's the works of Joseph Campbell, if anyone else is familiar with that. You know, he talks about the hero's journey. And I teach on this as well. Like, there's an overlap of hero's journey, which is a story structure, and Freytag pyramid. But what is the most compelling is the character of your story needs to go through transformation and a journey. So whatever the state is that they first start in, and if this is a business, then I would coach on, okay, well, what was your world before you decided to start your business? And that's kind of what they call like the exposition. And the hero's journey, that's kind of like their known world. And then it's kind of at what point did things change for you, right? Okay. So in the Freytag pyramid, that's sort of like the inciting incident. And in the hero's journey, that's sort of when you cross the threshold. So it goes from like what we know, what we know to be true, and what is our current world and our understanding, to going into completely the unknown, right? So into this whole world that you're not familiar with, and sort of what are the obstacles that show up for you, like in getting what you want. And that's another element too. Like in every story, the character needs to want something. So if you were to really distill it down, it's what does your character want at the beginning, and what gets in the way? And then the how the story should then unfold is the transformation that character goes through. So how they change in the end. And what makes storytelling vulnerable in going through this process is you have to go back to that moment where you weren't perfect, where you failed, where you were scared, where you face challenges. But if and when you do that, if you're able to do that, that's where you connect with people, right? Because nobody can relate to somebody who's perfect, where life just comes easy to them. Like, that's really boring. Yeah. And that kind of comes into the element of conflict, right? Like, a good story needs conflict for it to be interesting. Yeah. And that's what makes storytelling vulnerable, because not everyone is able to just kind of admit to a time where they didn't know something, or admit to a time where they failed. And when I coach on that, you know, the thing that I say is that as long as your story ends up to a point where, you know, you succeed, or the lesson learned was valuable to you, then, you know, it's like kind of remembering the last thing that you said. Then the rest of the journey is you know, people focus less on like, well, that was stupid. Why did you decide to do that in the first place, right? It becomes like, oh yeah, I can totally relate. Like, there's so many times that I've gone up on stage, and, you know, those moments, and I've worked for them too. Like, I'm not just somebody that just goes up on stage and be like, this is my heart, you know, do what you will. It takes a bit of practice, and there's a nuance nature to it as well, as how much vulnerability do you show and how much do you not. But then afterwards, people come up to me and said like, wow, you know, thank you for telling that story. And you know, and they have these moments in their lives that they then feel that they can open up and share with you, that really touch them, because they've either gone through the same thing or they've had a similar experience. And that's the authentic connection that I really, you know, really get a lot of satisfaction with. So, hi.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Where are you calling in from, Sarah?
Wait, you're choppy. You're a little choppy. What'd you say?
Ask where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Tennessee.
Oh, wow. Hi.
Okay.
Hello.
So you have a question for Kate, I guess, right?
Well, you were talking about being vulnerable and being willing to share and that kind of thing. So, and when you're looking to address your audience, is that, I'd heard a phrase like the pain point, being able to speak directly to your audience, their pain, what it is that they're dealing with. So that's something that I'm struggling with and working on professionally as in my online business. I'm in private practice in Tennessee, but just discovering what that pain point is and how to speak directly to that. So
yeah. No, totally. Yeah. You know, your customers and your audience are similarly the same thing, right? Like why an audience is there to see or hear you talk, you know, what brings them there. And that's sort of the same with your customers. Like what brings your customers to you that they're struggling with that you can then relate with the story. And for me, storytelling is as much about, you know, obviously sharing and telling your own story, but it's about active listening as well. So for me, the question is sort of like, what do you do as a service? Like, what is your...
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I counsel families and children. And I'm beginning to focus specifically on tween-age girls and their relationship with their parents and helping them communicate better. And that's what I've done professionally, but I also have a daughter, so it makes it a little more personal and helps me to relate better to my audience experiencing it.
Yeah, so for me,
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Sorry, you cut it for a second. Keep going. Sorry. Oh, okay.
No, that's it.
So for me, it's if you have like a general cross, you know, so cross point of sort of what your audience is looking for. So for me, if you're talking to you know, teenage girls, sort of what are the things that they're currently struggling with, or what are the things that they're going through. And for me, it becomes a matter of relatability. So if you can sort of think of a time of what their issue is or what their question might be, and is there a time in your life where you've dealt with that yourself, like overcome that? You know, again, kind of especially what you do can be very personal, and so that line between personal and public, you know, is very nuanced, right? Like you want to help your clients, but you're not exactly the patient either. You're the doctor. So in regards to that, then it becomes, for me, a matter of having those stories very much well rehearsed and structured ahead of time. You know, and I would really go through like a dynamic, because we all have, you know, the beauty of sort of like the hero's journey, or what Joseph Campbell teaches on, is that there are stages in life that we all go through, right? That they're similar, but the experiences are different. But if you're talking about teenage girls, sort of what are the challenges that they face, and maybe even that's evolved slightly because, you know, our day and age. But at the essence of what is the core theme? Is it like it's a daughter-mother relationship? Is it a sibling? Is it a friends? Is it fitting in? Is it a boyfriend? Like those are sort of what the narrative themes are, somebody going through that stage in their life. So then it becomes, okay, well, is there an experience that either I've gone through or something that I've challenged that is relatable on that theme that I can share with them that makes them then trust me, so that they will then share with me their experiences, and then I can help them in the best way possible, because now I have a little bit of insight and I have their trust. So yeah, that's sort of what I would, in regards to, you know, what is the pain point of your client versus sort of an audience. Like an audience is more, a little bit larger. So if you're kind of checking on the demographic, you know, what's the median age of people that are here? What's their life look like? Are they all retired? Are they looking at more of spending time with their grandchildren? Are they middle-aged? Are they more anxious about keeping their job because they're supporting their family? Like, what are the motivating factors for why people are listening to you? And then you can get at the themes, like, okay, well, what would possibly be the thing that people would be challenged with right now? And how can I relate to them best? Where in my life do I have that experience that they can connect with? If you're talking about like a one-on-one person, for me, especially when what you do, again, being so sensitive, it really becomes about listening and looking for those cues. So for me, stories are a little bit like having a business card in your back pocket. If you take the time to sort of look back, you know, if you put get a sheet of paper and really like, okay, where was I at this point in time? Like, what do I in my life has been really transformative for me? And then figure out what the story is around that. And then what they become is I have them like, so you have them in your back pocket. So when you know what those stories are, when you're talking with somebody and you pick up on those subtle cues, then you'll be like, oh, okay, I have a story that I already know, it's already formed, that I can share with you. That's going to help them to relate, and then you can build that trust more organically and authentically.
Yeah, well, I've been in practice on and off for 15 years, and so I'm now taking this online and just trying to figure out how to really hone in on my audience and speak to them in order to gain trust and get feedback and help them. So that's
and for me, it becomes like a distilled. So for me, if you're doing like online, you're like, okay, well, how do I have my bio or how do I have my summary that explains why it is that I do what I do? So if you sort of think about like, what was your world before before you decided to do this? When did things change for you, and what were the obstacles that you overcame to do it? So because that really describes your passion. Because people want to know why. Like, why do you do what you do? Is it because you really want to help people?
Right. And that's what I go for also, is I want to know as soon as I go to someone's website, I want to read that.
Yeah.
You're right.
One thing I was thinking, Sarah, is if you're trying to put this out online now, maybe take advantage of a few tools, like maybe a YouTube channel, and like Kate is saying, if you go back into your life and you find some stories that your clients can relate to, then how about making a couple of 1 to 2 minute long videos where you're just sharing your story, so people get to see, like she said, where you came from, but also start building trust with you, which is more difficult to do online, but I think video helps.
Yes, and I have a YouTube channel. I've started that and am just beginning all of this. So that's why I found
awesome.
Blab of interest.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Yes. Thank you for asking me.
Cool.
I appreciate it very much.
Thanks so much for your questions. They're really great.
And reach out to us anytime.
Thanks.
Okay, cheers.
Thank you so much. Thanks. You too.
That was actually a really great question, just because it can be so nuanced, right, between personal and hello.
Hi.
Hi, Renee. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Peoria, Illinois.
Oh, hi. Welcome.
Where are you guys?
I'm in Kitchener, and Kate's in
Toronto. I'm in Toronto, Canada.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. So I love the topic, and I've been enjoying what you've been saying about it. I came from a networking meeting, I guess you would call it, this morning, where I subbed for someone. So it was with a different group of people, so that changed my perspective, right? And I just noticed that one of the women in the group, it was a really small group, but she is a distributor for doTERRA essential oils. Mm-hmm. And, she did her 30-second commercial, or whatever you call it. And it was, okay, we get it. We know what you do. But suddenly 3 of the people started talking about an oil that they use and how it helps them. And, this went on for like the longest time. And I thought that made more of a difference. That's what I'm going to remember going forward. I'm never going to remember their 30-second commercials, just, I won't, right? And I think the power of the story is very underrated in our business world. So I just want.
So what happened, just so I get it straight, is in the experience you had, is one was more of a 30-second elevator speech commercial, and then the other ones were people telling their personal experience with a product or something.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Not that everyone is. I mean, in these, I also belong to BNI, and I don't know if you've ever been, BNI, but they do the same thing, and there aren't, when they limit you on the time to such a short period of time, you can't really tell great stories. The best stories take a little longer, but.
Yeah. For sure. The way that, in regards kind of going back, I don't know if you were at the beginning too, but I was talking about if you're telling a story, especially an experience story, and you record yourself and it lands at 11 minutes, then try to tell that story in 5, and then try to tell that story in 1. And then, of course, what that does is that it really kind of gives like what I call like the beats of the story. So the parts of the story that without which don't really make any sense. But also what you do is you have what I also call like a story structure. And then the story architecture then becomes like how you make those beautiful, like those specific elements of the story more decorative by adding that emotion or adding those extra details and really bringing in the 5 senses. Because if you're listening to a story, the better stories are ones where you can imagine yourself as that person who's speaking. And to do that, you need to then bring in details that include our other 5 senses, such as like it smelled terrible or I was so cold, you know, all these different things. But yeah, when you get down to like a 30-second, how do you make a 30-second or a minute introduction interesting? And there's another part of what makes stories compelling, and again, it kind of goes back to neurobiology, and we're kind of looking for different patterns. What stands out, right? What stands out? What is different in the situation? Because we need to determine whether it's a threat or not. And that's where sort of novelty comes in. So when you're distilling sort of what you do and why you do it down to a minute, try to think of like, what's your exposition? So what's your background? What's like maybe a sentence that indicates or hints at why or when things change? What was maybe one of the biggest challenges to why you do what you do? And then of course the resolution is, you know, the satisfaction that you get from it. So yeah, it's not exactly epic, but when you make, you always, if you get to the sort of what the challenge was, because the challenge hits at the emotion, because I think that's what you're talking about. When people are talking about these oils, they weren't just saying like, oh, it smelled really nice. Maybe they were saying like, you know, the smell reminded me of the time that I was in my grandmother's garden, right? Or afterwards, I just, you know, I had been so stressed out and I was feeling so anxious for the entire week. And then I used this oil and everything just went away. And so for the first time all week, I felt normal, right?
Right.
And so again, it's like a change, but it's an emotional connection. So if you do an emotional connection to something, then people are going to remember it a lot more. You know, for me, one thing that I didn't say at the beginning, you know, because it's a little bit personal, is the one thing that I love about stories is because I remember it and I have a terrible memory. And the connection that I have also in regards to memory and putting things in the context or having that relationship is that my mom recently has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so working with that through her, there's 2 things that are going on. It's really the communication, like communicating with her is becoming more challenging, but then also my own fear of, you know, is that going to be me one day, right? And so the component of storytelling and sort of being able to remember things for me is something that is very personal and resonates. But it's, you know, again, and that's sort of like the nuanced part of storytelling. It's just like, when do you share certain information or at what point in time, and when do you don't? And then it also becomes a matter of what is your audience and what is relevant to them in a way. So yeah, so when you're going down to the 1 minute, then for me, what makes it different is what makes you different or distinguishes you is a novelty, and I'm more likely to remember it. Or I do this because I had a brother or a sister that went through this, and now I want to help other people to go through it or more easily than I did, say. And again, it's like an emotion and something that relatable, and I can sort of connect with you on that level. So
right.
Do that. But then, yeah, so it kind of, again, goes down to the story structure. What's the beginning? When did things change? How did you overcome it? And how are you different at the end of it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
so I just kind of.
That's
yeah.
Well, I'm gonna hop off. I have an appointment to work out with my trainer, but I just wanted to.
Good for you.
I appreciated that. So.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Reach out anytime.
So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest challenge. You know, when you have like a 5-minute story versus like how do you become interesting and when you've only got a minute and become memorable. So yeah.
That actually ties into another thing I was wondering, and you just mentioned it briefly there with Renee, is how does one decide what they should put in and what they shouldn't put in? Because that was one thing I remember when I was building the story for that storytelling event that you were hosting and you were coaching me on the phone. I had a certain idea of what I should put in, but after talking to you, I was a totally different approach of what was going to be good to put in and what was going to be not necessary. So how does one decide? Like, do we put a kind of a list and check things off, or is there a criteria? What would you suggest for should and shouldn't put in a story?
Yeah, for sure, because there's so in this, especially this day and age, that there really seems to be a loss of what is private and what is public. And some people have varying degrees of what they're comfortable with sharing and what they're not. And sometimes I think that there's also a misunderstanding of what that the impact on that is, right? Because I can be totally comfortable in telling you something personal, but you might not be comfortable hearing it. So I think that there's also two sides to that, right? You have to sort of respect your audience. Be like, so they really need to know this? And that really comes down to, for me, understanding like what are your private stories and then what are your public. Part of my personal journey was my first year of university, I followed my boyfriend because I didn't have no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that I loved him. And I got to university and he breaks up with me. And so for the rest of the year, I fell into this depression because I was in this program that I didn't like, that I wasn't good at. And the entire time I had to watch them get together. And so at the end, the university essentially kicked me out. They said, no, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go think about things. I fought it and they let me back. But for a long time, I would really skip over that detail because nobody likes to go around saying like, yeah, I flunked out of first year university, because there's a huge failure that's attached to that. And so for a time, I just sort of said I did first year university and then I took a year off to figure things out, which isn't a lie. You're just leaving out certain detailed information. But when I became more comfortable with that, because now where I am, I'm successful, I'm doing what I want to do. And yeah, it was a hard-fought journey and these are some of the bumps along the way. And then I ended up sharing that with an audience. Again, that's a personal detail, but it's not necessarily something that's going to make the audience feel uncomfortable. So I think that you really have to take that into consideration. And when I'm working with clients or I'm coaching people, I think it's necessary to have a column of personal stories, like private stories, because I think also that needs to be something that is shared and earned by somebody, because as much as there's people trusting you, you kind of have to trust them as well. And that really becomes to the relationship that you have with them. But the reason why I think it's necessary or important to develop that personal story database, as I call it, even if it's something that you don't share, is because it's really informed who you are as a person and your character. So even though there are stories that you feel comfortable telling people, there might be elements of a private story that explain to or contribute. So when you know what they are, you can hint at them or you can reference them without really kind of going into all of the details, but it still makes that public story that you're telling make sense. So, but if you don't know, and you don't know what the story is that you're telling, sometimes if you're nervous or sometimes if you're just feeling off, you can start ending up sort of like down this rabbit hole of being like, and then I was on the floor and, like all these different, and the audience is like, what is happening right now? So that's what I mean. In some ways, it's about being personally prepared, and then you're like, okay, well, this is something that I'm willing to share right now, and I feel that this person is willing to receive it, and then it becomes comes to your discretion. But if you're not prepared and you don't know what those stories are, then you can be at risk. So, sorry.
That's awesome advice, and I like the idea of, even though you might not share the personal story, how you've suggested, but getting it down and thinking about it anyway is good to just to see, where did I come from, where did my values come from, what did my experience teach me to get where I am today. And yeah, that's actually, I think, something I've never thought of, is to even get that distilled so that you know where you came from, to even just have that in the back of your mind, even if you don't share it. I think that's a really good thought, because there are experiences that have shaped who we are and the choices that we've made and the things that we do. And I think I've heard a lot of people say, oh, the past is the past, but I disagree. I think the past was there for a reason, and that sometimes digging into where we came from, I think gives us a more holistic or a more complete picture of who we are today. So I really like that suggestion, actually.
Yeah, and I think it kind of also gives a sense of credibility, right? It's just
yes,
entrepreneur, and there's like,
yeah.
When you get into something, you're like, why should people believe me? Or, what makes me qualified to do this? But Yeah, and touching on, I don't know if the audience is familiar with the Moth. The Moth.org is an American sort of nonprofit storytelling organization, and they actually have sort of rules. So if you're getting up on stage, it has to be 5 years. I think 5 years since a divorce and 10 years from a death, I think, in some ways. Yeah, just because the emotions can be really raw, and the last, you kind of have to, you're kind of responsible for the audience too, because you don't want to break down. I've had those moments where I've gone to, I don't know if anyone's sort of experienced open mic situations where it just becomes so awkward because it's not funny and this person is obviously really upset and you don't quite know what to do. So that's where you have to have also responsibility for the audience.
That's not the way you want people to remember you with those kind of emotions attached.
It's like, oh God, I don't know what to do here. What am I supposed to do? Please stop talking.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, Kate. Thanks so much.
I think you've lost your. Did you lose your audio?
Oh, can you hear me?
I don't know if there's any questions that anyone has. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. Can't hear you. I don't know why.
Can you hear me now?
I don't know if there's any. I'll maybe click on questions. Can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't hear you. I don't know why. What happened?
That's
Did
all
you do
right.
something?
I was nothing.
You didn't do anything. What? Oh no.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. It's technical difficulty.
Let me just type here to you, Kate. Can you hear me now? Now it's okay?
There we go.
No, not.
I think we might be. Are we done?
Yeah.
I think we might be done.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I thank you, Kate, even though you can't.
Okay.
For joining this call,
okay.
And thank everybody who joined into the call too.
All right. Well, thank you for listening and watching. Yeah. All right. We'll talk to you later, Jamie. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks so much, and thank you for joining the First Bright Minds Blabcast. We'll see you next time. Cheers.